Cape Verde. 1460, just off the coast of West Africa. The land is empty and uninhabited. Climate is too erratic for crops. And the only other food sources are screeching bats or the bitter meat of helpless turtles. So what would make the Portuguese interested in this uninhabited archipelago? The land was most likely already known to Africans, and even the seafaring Phoenicians, but Europe would first encounter the islands in the mid-1400s. The island groups of Madeira and the Azores were already colonized earlier in the century, under Prince Henry the Navigator. With the addition of Cape Verde, in the 1460s, Portugal would have access to West African gold, bypassing Islamic North Africa. The Portuguese king carved up the islands, and allocated each to a capitão, or captain, to settle and develop, a system that would be later used in the Brazilian colonies. The first captain allocated land was Antonio de Noli, a Genoese explorer sailing under Portugal's banner, who first took interest in the islands. The location was ideal for Portuguese explorers as well, and used as stops on Vasco da Gama's route to India, and Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe. Cape Verde was initially settled with Portuguese, many from the nearby Azores Islands. In 1496, amidst the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, Jews on the mainland were expelled, and many headed to Portuguese islands off the coast of Africa, like Cape Verde. They would emerge as foremost traders and adventurers, known as lançados. As for the island production itself, sugarcane was to be the staple, but as mentioned earlier, the island soil and climate weren't very friendly to crops. To get around this, the Portuguese deforested much of the region in order to gain access to better soil. They would then bring in cattle and horses. Eventually, cotton textiles would be a primary trade commodity, exported to the African coast. They would also extract red dye from lichens, called ochre. In return, Portugal would import the gold they were after, but also pepper, ivory, and slaves. They would be the first European power to buy African slaves and transport them across the ocean, kickstarting the Atlantic slave trade in the early 1500s. The Portuguese were too weak to militarily dominate any of the African areas, but there was no need to, as the African trading routes were already supremely efficient, with both the Portuguese and West Africans working together. The arrangements, however, weren't beneficial for the slaves. They would be brought to Cape Verde easily, because of the proximity to the African coast, but have no recourse once they were there, and couldn't escape the island. Many remained as slaves on Cape Verde, producing sugar and cotton, but the majority would be taken to the Americas, mainly Brazil. Over time, less Europeans would settle on Cape Verde, because of its relative distance from Portugal, and this led to race mixing on the islands, but the increasing importation of slaves would see them make up the vast majority of the population on Cape Verde's two foremost islands. In 1582 there were just 1,600 white and mixed-race settlers, but there were almost 14,000 slaves. In the late 1500s, King Philip II of Spain took over Portugal, and Cape Verde would then come under threat from Spain's rivals, like England. Francis Drake, the English privateer, would raid settlements on the islands, and the Dutch would attack as well. In the early 1700s, French pirate Jacques Cassard would attack and cause the eventual relocation of the Cape Verdean capital. With trade routes ever shifting, Cape Verde became less important over time, and with the end of the slave trade in 1876, along with the lack of production due to famines and bad weather, Portugal had less need for the island group. In 1975, they would gain independence, but would retain a lot of their Portuguese culture, as many of the inhabitants were mixed race. The volcanic, starved islands of Cape Verde never meant anything to anyone. They were known to Islamic seafarers and ancient cultures, but no interest was truly given to these lonely islands off the coast. In the end, the island's fate was to be the lifeblood, or death knell, of thousands.